Thank you very much, Andrew. Maybe you need to stop sharing the screen. Yeah, excellent. So welcome everybody, morning, evening, or midday. I will share my screen now. Can everybody see the first slide? Andrew?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much to the Postal History Bureau for giving me the opportunity to talk about the importance of rarity and condition in postal history exhibits. And as you may be aware, your bureau has been working on harmonizing the guidelines over the last couple of years with the other commission guidelines. And basically the wording that I'm now going to present when it comes to rules is rather the revised, still not accepted guidelines, rather than the old ones, but the content is basically the same. So I would like to start out with how the rules define rarity and condition. And basically it says that rarity is directly related to the philatelic items shown and to the relative scarcity of the material, however, not directly the value. Thus, rarity is primarily related to how many examples exist. It is, however, also considered from how broad a perspective the items are rare. And I will get back to this a lot because that seems to be the key aspect of discussion when rarity of postal history items are discussed. It's really from how broad a perspective are the items rare. It also says in the regulations that the jurors will primarily be looking for how difficult it is to obtain the relevant and interesting material in the exhibit. So difficulty of acquisition. How difficult is it to duplicate the exhibit? Has the exhibitor avoided philatelically produced material where possible? And how important are the rare items seen from a broader perspective? And the rules give an example that, for instance, a postal marking of a small town showing the only example known, but of a standard type used throughout the country, would be of less significance than a unique example of a special cancellation type used only at this town. The reason being that if it's a type of cancellation that exists from every town, then a collector of Markopholy of that country could take any rare example of many, whereas if it was a special type unique to that little place, then the exhibitor of the whole country's Markopholy would also need that piece because it is of broader significance. Okay, so another point that is very important to make is that the rarity in postal history exhibits should primarily be considered from the postal history aspect of the item. Why do we say that? Well, it means that a rare rate, route, postal marking is usually more important when considering rarity in postal history exhibit than a common postal history item franked by a rare stamp. So remember, this is not traditional. It is the postal history aspects that we primarily evaluate, and therefore it's primarily the rarity of the postal history aspect of the items. And I would like to illustrate that with an example from Danish Philatelic. Here you see a postal receipt for 3 money orders sent from Denmark to Norway in 1872, which is pre-UPU. Normally, the fee for a postal receipt for a money order was 2 skilling, and this green form cost 2 skilling. However, in this case, the amount sent was so high that it had to be separated out on 3 forms. So now and you have to pay the fee for each form. So basically, it's now 6 skilling, and here a stamp has been used to uprate the form to pay the full fee. That's a postal history rarity because there are only 2 recorded postal receipts uprated with any skilling stamp. This cover is in a way similarly rare. It's a very common rate. It's a domestic letter. However, it's an inverted frame from print 4, And in the sheet, there were 200 stamps. 199 of the frames were turned normally, and 1 was turned opposite. And this is, of course, the rarity of that printing. And there are only 3 recorded usages of this inverted frame on cover. However, this is not a postal history rarity primarily, because it's only the stamp that makes this item rare. The rate and any other postal history aspect shown by the item is common. So in this case, one is a rarity in postal history exhibit, the other one is not. All right, having said that, if an exhibit has a lot of postal history rarities, and then take traditionally important items, such as rare stamps on postal items, largest known franking, earliest recorded usage, mid-frankings, etc., this will also be appreciated in postal history as kind of a spice on top of the main meal. And the main meal is the postal history rarities. But if the exhibitor goes out and find rare usages to show the common rates, the common rules, the common roots, that would of course be considered as a small plus, but they should not be the primary driver of the rarity in a postal history exhibit. The primary driver should be postal history as aspects that are rare. And here is an example of such a thing. So the domestic letter rate in Denmark was 8 øre for 27 years. There are hundreds of thousands of these covers, and they usually look like the top one. There's an 8 øre stamp on it. You can get tens of thousands of these covers. So I, in my postal rate study, in postal history, still need to show the domestic letter rate. It's part of the story. So I don't show the top cover, I show the lower cover. And the lower cover is a mixed franking between the first print of the 4 øre stamp and a stationary cutout in skilling. So it's a mixed currency franking. There are very few of these, and it's also used during the first months. So I try to find something that's special for another reason than the primary reason I show it, which is the rate, when I want to show something common. So that's of course good, but it should not be the primary driver of rarity in a postal history exhibit. So as I mentioned already, when we assess rarity, we need to keep in mind that rarity is both an objective criteria, how many items are known or recorded, but it's also a relative term. And here I would like to point your attention to a lot of exhibits that we see, especially on local and national level, which are exhibits of some village or town, a local area exhibit. Often exhibitors of such exhibits claims that everything is very rare, and that's usually true. It's very rare from that particular village or town. Now, however, in most such exhibits, the items are only rare from this very narrow perspective of this single town, and not from the broader national or international perspective. Therefore, we have to be careful not to give too high rarity points for such exhibits. I will give that, what I mean with relative rarity, I would like to illustrate with an example. So the top item here is the Post Office Mauritius stamp on a ball invitation, and there are 3 of such covers known. There are also 3 covers known of this item, which is an inverted date from the Swiss town of Steffè. And there's also 3 recorded of that. Now, one is a world-class rarity, the other isn't. And why is that? Well, the first is a very famous classical story about why those stamps came to be. It's well known. Many people, many aspects of philately could use that cover. Whereas if you want an inverted date in a cancellation, there are thousands of possibilities from thousands of different towns around the world. So you don't need to have, in particular, this one from this town in Switzerland. So the rarity level, even though the same number of items are known, the top cover is rare from a broader perspective than the lower cover. Here's another example of the same thing. This is the only recorded Danish insured letter sent to any non-European destination before 1907. Insured letters sent before 1907 to and overseas destinations are few and far between from any country in the world. That's not common anywhere. The lower cover here is an insured letter sent to Germany, or from a similar period, and it's the only recorded insured letter showing the 168 euro rate. So if we count, there's one of this rate and there's one of the other rate. However, there's more than 100 Danish insured letters sent to Germany, so from a broader perspective, the lower cover is not as rare as the top cover. So the top one is an international rarity because an insured letter sent that far at that time is rare from any country, whereas the specific combination rate from Denmark to Germany is only rare from a relatively local perspective. And this brings me to 4 different levels of philatelic rarities in postal history that many judges have in mind. They are, of course, overlapping these categories, but we basically talk of world-class rarities, international rarities, national rarities, and local or specialized rarities. And I will now like to discuss each one of these in a bit more detail. Well, a world-class rarity are basically items that most philatelists know without having to read any description. Everybody knows them. Most are famous due to the stamps on those covers, not so much for the postal history aspect they show. And there are very few world-class rarities. And you do not need to have any world-class rarities to get 20 points in rarity in postal history, since no such items exist for most postal history collecting areas. Otherwise, maximum point could only be given to 5 to 10 or 20 different subjects in the world, and everybody else would lose out. That's not the case. And here are examples of world rarities, and I have no descriptions on this page because to many people, these are self-explanatory. The top cover is the Post Office Mauritius stamps to Bordeaux. This is the most expensive philatelic cover in existence, as far as I know. It's also one of the most famous ones. It's in the Court d'Honneur at a lot of different exhibitions. Down, you see a newspaper from Moldova, franked with a huge multiple of the rarest bull's head stamp of pre-Romania. Both of these items are primarily rare because of the stamps on the items. Now, there are classical, well-known world-class rarities in postal history. Here are 2 of them. The lower one is the famous mixed franking between Hawaii missionaries and US stamps. And the top one is a Pony Express cover sent across the Atlantic, and it's also a illustrated envelope to go with it as well. Even without a description, most philatelists will immediately recognize these 4 items as world-class rarities. So we don't need to talk much about those. They don't exist in most collecting areas. So let's talk about international rarities. What are international rarities? They are relevant if you want to have very high scores in your postal history exhibit. These are basically items that are rare from an international postal history perspective. Examples of very rare types of mail, for instance. Which types these are depend on the time period. In early period, a money letter from 1700 something internationally is probably rare from almost any country. If we get to the UPU period, it would have to be something like international money orders, registered business papers, non-mail parcels, things like that. Very strange, unusual types of mail. It can be the earliest or best quality use of a rare and significant hand stamp or a rare and important cancellation. Or it can be cover showing exceptional rates, routes, destinations, and or significant dates. And let me give you a few examples of such items. This is an international rarity. It's an insured parcel sent pre-UPU from Denmark to France. There are very few pre-UPU insured parcel letters sent internationally in general. And this one has the added attraction that it's a mixed franking between Danish postage stamps and French revenues. And there is a postal history reason why this mixed franking has to be there. The international rarities could also be a special mail service that only exists in one place on Earth, something like the Pony Express in the US. This is a very special mode of transportation that you can hardly find from any other place. So it's of international significance. Or a special type of mail could be a registered commercial papers to an exotic destination. The lower cover is a registered commercial papers. Commercial papers is a special type of printed matter where you had to pay at least the 4th weight rate, and it had to be only business-related content. And in this case, you hardly ever see those things registered. And here it's even sent from Denmark to Mexico. So that's something that's exceptionally rare from any country. It doesn't matter if it's from Denmark or any other country. Here is an international UPU money order sent on the 1st of April, 1879. That's the first day that the UPU allowed international money orders. Now, international money orders are rare, and having one from the first day is exceptional. So that is an international rarity from a postal history perspective. And here's another international rarity from a postal history perspective. It's a postmaster provisional cover, but sent across the Atlantic to London. There are quite a lot of rare postmaster provisional covers because the stamps are very rare, but from a postal, but most of them are sent locally. Now, a postmaster provisional on a cover sent across the Atlantic is exceptional from a postal history perspective. So it's an international rarity in postal history. Here are slightly more specialized international rarities. So the world's first machine cancellations were from Great Britain and the United States. And here are some of the first covers in exceptionally good condition. Those machine cancels are of international significance because they are the first ones. The next category I would like to discuss is national rarities. These are items that are rare and important from a broad national perspective with respect to type of mail, rate, route, regulations, or markings. A national rarities could, for instance, be a significant trial registration service used for only 3 days in Berlin. That's not only interesting for a Berlin collector, it's interesting for any collector of German registration. So it's of national significance. Here is a Danish cover showing a registered letter rate that was only in effect for 3 months because the conversion rules between the old skilling currency and the euro currency changed after 3 months. And it doesn't matter from which town this cover is from or which stamps is on this cover. This is rare from a postal history perspective from any town from a national perspective. And here is a wonderful military marking from China that again is interesting to Chinese pre-philately. Basically, it wouldn't matter from where it was from. It's unusual in general for Chinese philately. So that's our national rarities. Finally, we have local, you can also call them specialized rarities. These are items that are rare and important from a narrow perspective with respect to type of mail, rate, route, regulations, or markings. What could they be? Well, here's an example. This is a cancellation from Howard County, Maryland, the United States, and there's only one known cover with this particular Woodstock cancellation. It's the only known example of that date stamp, but the challenge is that it's not significant for any exhibit except for one of a country or hometown collection, because there are many date stamps that are rare from a national perspective. If you collect the national postal history of the US, you do not need to have this particular cover. So it is a local rarity. It's a rarity, there are very few of it, but it's of limited or more specialized significance. It's good, but it's more specialized significance. Here's another example. This is a printed matter sent from Denmark to Croatia. And there are only 2 recorded printed matter items sent from Denmark to Croatia before 1907. So it is rare. However, the destination does not affect the UPU printed matter rate, which is abundant. So you can find this 5 euro rate in the thousands to all kinds of different destinations. So the item is rare, but not of broader significance. So having presented these different category of rarities, good exhibits needs to have at least the last, or it needs to have the last 3 categories. It needs to have a few international rarities, quite a few national ones, and many local and specialized ones. And those local and specialized are not unimportant. They are very important for your specific collecting area, because if you don't have the rarities needed to tell the story and the topic that you are telling, there you need to have the rarities. Even if they are only of local significance, you still need to have them, ideally. So they are very important to the exhibits, and they should be appreciated by the judges. But to get to the very highest points, there should also be items that would fulfill the criteria for national or internationally significant rarities. So good exhibits have a mixture of all the different types of rarity levels. Well, how do we then assess rarity as judges? Can I know that that Woodstock cancellation is unique? No way. It is impossible for a judge to know all the worldwide rare rates, routes, and markings. There exists no philatelist who know this. A consequence of this is that it is the exhibitor's responsibility of doing the necessary personal study needed to determine approximately how many of a particular item have been recorded. And it is the exhibitor that should tell the judges when something is rare. And ideally, with a factual statement, one of approximately 10 recorded, for instance, of this particular marking, or only recorded example of this marking. The reason why this becomes important, or you should be a little bit careful and use common sense, because if enough details are considered, almost every postal history item becomes unique. This is the only recorded letter sent from this village to that village on that particular day by that particular person. That statement is correct, but it's of no significance. The cover is unique if you consider all aspects of the cover, but it's of no significance. So in postal history, it is therefore essential, if you make a only recorded or rare or unique statement, you would ideally need to tell the judges why that, what makes that cover one of 3 recorded? What is it about the cover that's one of 3 recorded? If you don't tell that, it becomes very difficult for the judge to evaluate how significant your 1 of 2 recorded statement is. So when we assess rarity as judges, we also assess, indirectly at least, if the exhibit explains why an item is rare. So you can see that the word, just the word unique or 2 recorded without any explanation is often not very useful. Explanations to viewer should include exactly what is rare about the item. For instance, only recorded cover taking this route, or with this rate, or with this marking. Then the judges can better assess how significant this rarity is. So it's your job as exhibitor to help the judges understand the significance of your rarities. So here are a few examples. This is an example from a collection of India and China. And basically here is an extremely detailed description of the rarity level. So it reads here, so far, 14 combination covers, China-India, are recorded from this period, which runs from December 1902 to March 1904, of which this is the only one sent from this particular town. The oval hand stamp of that town with the stars has only been used in December 1903. There are 4 recorded, and this is the only one cancellation as used as cancellation. The others are transit hand stamps. This is extremely precise and extremely detailed, but it's probably a bit of an overkill if you do that on all your rarities, because the judges will have not the time to read it. So it will be probably, in most cases, unless if you do it a lot, it would be more advisable to take out the most significant rarity aspect and mention that one only. Here's a more typical way of doing it with a single line statement. And in this case, the upper cover, the rarity statement reads, only recorded mixed franking involving Danish and straight settlement stamps. The lower rarity statement reads, only recorded overseas letter showing the pre-13 June 1881 rules for postage due charges. Both are only recorded, but which one is more significant? Well, clearly the top one, because this is the only recorded mixed franking involving stamps from these 2 countries. The rarity statement below is significantly more detailed, and the top item would probably be an international rarity, whereas the lower item would probably be a national level rarity. Here's a lovely cover sent from Hong Kong to Peru. And here's a rarity statement saying 1 of 2 letters recorded and only 1 from Hong Kong. And then there is a footnote. If you want to know more, that's also quite a nice way of doing it. You can see here that it's the 2nd letter on the same itinerary to Lima. And that one is from Le Havre, France to Lima, and it's illustrated here and here. So you can see that the rarity statement here relates to this particular sailing or itinerary. So what I would think about here is, what about how many covers are there from Hong Kong to Peru in general? If it was my cover, I would maybe think about saying, how many are there to Peru? If there are 10, 20, 30, I wouldn't mention it. But if there are only 2, then I would also mention that maybe. But it really depends, it's personal taste. If it's a study of routes, then the rarity statement here related to the route is of course the most relevant one. And if it would be a more general postal history with rate to different countries, then the rarity statement related to how rare mail is to that country may be the more relevant rarity statement. Okay. It's very important to stress that when we assess rarity as judges, it should be a positive evaluation. We should consider what the exhibit contains. You should look positively for rare items. An exhibit with only ordinary material cannot get high rarity points. That's pretty obvious. It's also, you should be aware that not all expensive items are actually rare. Remember, rare has 2 aspects: how many are recorded and from how broad a perspective are they rare. And things like Sachsen-Dreyer, 2 RBS Danish first stamp, uprated Mulready, Basil Doves on cover, they're all very expensive, but there are actually quite a lot of them. And you can buy them many times each year if you have enough money. So the number of items known of these items are not particularly rare. They are very nice still in an exhibit, but they're not particularly rare actually. An exhibit which has many rare items should get maximum points even if a few rarities are missing. There are almost no exhibitor in the world who has every single rarity from their collecting area. Would be lovely if you have an exhibit like that. It's great, but in most cases this is unrealistic, at least for broader subjects. So we should not penalize exhibitors for missing a few rarities if they have a lot of other rarities. And finally, there is a point that comes up in discussion with exhibitors, especially very high-level exhibitors. Oh, sorry. I had one more point that I forgot, and that is that many missing items will, however, indirectly be considered under rarity, because a well-prepared judge will have studied that area, will know in advance what the interesting and important items in that collecting areas are, And if there's hardly any of these items present, it will indirectly affect rarity, but it should still primarily be a positive evaluation. So if many of them, but not all of them, are available, that's good enough. But here I come to the other point. So if an exhibit has a lot of rare items and is already getting 29 to 30 points for rarity and condition, adding more rare items should not generate more points in other judging criteria. We very often have this issue where an exhibitor has a lot of rarities and maybe gets 93 points and wants 95, and then goes out and spends $1 million or $10 million on new material and then still gets 93 points. And that person is highly frustrated because why don't I get more points? Well, if the rarity level is already at 29 or 30, buying more rare items alone is not going to increase it because you can't get 32. So if you have gotten 93 points and you have 29 to 30 points for rarity and condition, probably it doesn't cost any money to improve your exhibit, because you should probably look at improving treatment, knowledge and research, maybe even presentation. And in some cases, you may look to improve the condition of the common items. Maybe that would help. But buying more rare items alone is then, in these special cases where you already have maximum points in that class, buying more doesn't help necessarily. This brings me nicely to condition. And when we assess condition, we assess the condition of the shown items relative to the best possible condition for what is available of that type of item. So it's relative to what exists. You cannot demand that every cover from an old Indian state look as perfect as classical GB Germany or Denmark. They just don't look like that. You also have special cases such as disaster mail, disinfected mail, or letters written to soldiers. They don't exist in pristine condition because the judges need to consider the circumstances and do not expect this type of items in perfect condition because they don't exist. So condition is relative to the best condition such items exists in. I would like to also give a few pointers to how many points are given for what kind of condition. So basically, most judges start at 7 points. If everything is kind of in standard condition, we tend to give about 7 points. If the condition is better than average, significantly better than average, we tend to give 8 points. And if it's lower, significantly lower than average, we tend to give 6 points. Sorry, I think I said 6 points before. 8 points, of course. 6, 7, and 8 points. And if you look from the local, national, and international levels, then the vast majority of exhibits get 6, 7, or 8 points. But since this is an international audience, there may be the interest of how to get to 9 to 10 points. What would be demanded? What is typical of the exhibits that gets 9 to 10 points in condition? One thing I have noticed is that the common material tends to be in exceptional condition. The rare material is in the best available condition. And if you want 9 to 10 points, then the quality of all aspects of the items are considered. The cleanliness of the item, clear cancellation, nice perforation, well-cut stamps, no ugly stains, no ugly folds. Full points basically require that the exhibitor has taken exceptional care to find the more common material in superb condition. And this is sometimes forgotten. The rare items are very nice, but the common item is the first item the exhibitor ever got, and the exhibitor didn't bother to change the common items. And that usually can make a difference in the general impression of the exhibit. And I'll give you what is top condition. Well, the first slide here is for all classes. Basically, Mint stamps should ideally be perfectly centered with perfect perforations or margins. Cancel stamps should also be well centered, no defects, and with a cancellation that's clearly readable and ideally turned the right way. And postal history items, like this one, should basically be clean with clear cancellations, readable cancellations, and no stains, and so on. And this item is in exceptional condition because it looks like it never left a stamp collecting album, but it actually went halfway around the world in 1894. It's a Danish item that was sent to Singapore, and you can nicely see the arrival cancellation on the front. And it actually went halfway around the world, but it still looks like it never left Denmark. So that's, of course, exceptional condition. I would like to mention no exhibit can have only items looking like this because they simply do not exist for everything you want to show. So you cannot expect people to only have this level of condition. There are some special considerations. Let's get back to the Pony Express. How was Pony Express covers transported? They were put in a saddlebag that was probably not always very waterproof. Then it was put from one horse to the next over in the big Pony Express, thousands of kilometers, more than 1,000 kilometers. For the Virginia Pony Express, somewhat shorter. But basically, they were attacked by Indians. They were holed up by storms. Most of those covers don't look very good for this reason. So most Pony Express covers are repaired, dirty, ripped, shortened, and or they have tears in the envelopes or the stamps are cut into. That's normal, that's acceptable standard condition. Finding Pony Express covers, for instance, without any of these issues is extremely difficult, and the shown cover above doesn't have any of these problems, and that is superb condition for this type of item. Now, I would like to use this cover also to mention another aspect. If you would use this cover in a collection of the town of Aurora, then this cover is lovely because the town name Aurora is extremely easily readable on the right side of this envelope. Had both cancellations been struck like the left one, it would have been difficult to use this cover in an Aurora cancellation because you can't really read Aurora very well on the left side. But you can on the right side, and then it's fine. The point here is that the condition of the aspect of the cover you are using is what you should pay the most attention to, ideally. Another point I would like to make, this is also top condition for postal history, because the overall impression is most important. On this spectacular cover, a couple of the stamps have a few short perforations. However, that does not matter at all for an item like this, because nobody notices whether there is a short perforation on one of the stamps. That's not why it's spectacular. Then I would like to address a point that is also often discussed with exhibitors. And this is condition points for exhibits containing only common material. We often have it with exhibits of modern, very modern material. And the exhibitor, for understandable reasons, says, everything I show is in pristine condition. It looks perfect. We have it for first day cover exhibits. We see sometimes on local or national level, for instance. All the covers are in perfect condition. Why don't you give 10 points? Well, the standard condition for common material is flawless and very nice. Thus, this alone tends to result in about 7 points. If there are no scarce or rare item in an exhibit based on which condition can be differentiated, it becomes very hard to get more than 7 to 8 points, because the point I made earlier was that we tend to give about 7 points for standard condition. And if the standard condition is flawless and very nice, it becomes very hard to get better than that. It's not impossible, but it gets very hard. And here's an example of average contra great condition of common material. This is a 5-year postal card. It's extremely common. And the top item here is kind of a little bit smudged cancellation. It's not turned the right way. There's a bit of a fold over the upper left corner. That's basically average condition for an item like that. It's exhibitable, it's okay, it looks nice, but it's not superb. Superb is the lower one, and it's not canceled to order. It's actually sent through the mail. It has a non-philatelic message. It looks like it may have been canceled to order, but that's why this, because the condition is so exceptional. And it is extremely difficult to find common items in such superb a condition. So if you show common material and you are able to find it in that kind of condition, this will be appreciated. It's not very expensive. It costs a lot of time, but it's not expensive. Here's an example of a rarity in poor contra great condition. This is a domestic AR form. There are only 6 complete forms recorded showing the 8-euro rate, which ran for 27 years. So this is a rare type of mail, and it's also rare with this particular rate. The left item, 3 out of the 6 recorded items look like the left items. Part of the form is missing. Several, it has damages, part rips into, it's stained. The cancellation is reasonable, but not perfect, but reasonable. But it has a lot of condition issues. There's only one of the 6 items that's looked like the right one. And since that exists, that is the best possible condition for that item. So if you show the left item, you are going to potentially risk losing a bit in overall impression of the condition. So if you have an item like that, you really need to think about, in my opinion, whether you want to include that item in your exhibit or leave it at home. And this brings me to what I call my rarity quality matrix of modern exhibiting. It was first published in this book that Andrew mentioned. And basically what it says is that superb top quality is excellent for exhibiting, no matter how common the items are, because they are actually difficult to find, even for common material. Very, very good quality is, of course, also good for exhibiting, no matter how rare it is. When it becomes difficult to decide whether to include an item in an exhibit or not is when it gets rare or super rare. Do you include an item in poor quality if it's rare or super rare? Well, in my quality rarity matrix here, it's yellow. And at yellow, it says, is it really needed? When I see an item like that, I always ask the question, is this item really needed for the story, for the treatment I want to show in this exhibit? Do I really need the item, or can I show something very similar with a related item that looks much better? If the answer is, I can only show this important item, this important aspect of my story, of my treatment with this ugly item, I will include it, because otherwise my story or my treatment is not complete. But if I can avoid it, for instance, if it's a 3rd weight cover that's unique, I may be satisfied showing only a 1st rate or a 2nd weight cover. Why do I need the 3rd rate if it looks terrible? I have shown the principle by showing the 1st and 2nd rate, for instance. And basically anything in the red area, I would advise against showing that in exhibiting. And remember, quality scale is a relative scale. It's relative to the quality that the material you collect and exhibit exists in. So top quality is different for different types of collecting areas. And I find this matrix very useful when I consider whether I should purchase an item offered for sale or not. That was my main points for today, but we have actually reserved a full hour for questions and answers, general discussion. So we would be very happy to have questions about any aspects of this talk. And just to make sure that there will not be no questions, I would like to raise 2. You can of course raise any other ones, but I just want to raise 2 that I find quite interesting and which I feel has been discussed quite a bit lately. it is clear that the quality demands of collectors have gone up with time. So collectors now are much more strict on condition than they used to be. Should this be reflected in stricter judging of conditions? Some judges say standard quality is now better than it used to be in exhibits. Should that mean that we increase our demands in exhibiting? I'm not sure what I think about that. I have mixed feelings about this, but what do you think? Then there is the issue of condition rarities. Condition rarities are items that are exceptionally rare in the type of condition they are shown in. And here are two examples. This is a stamp from the German state of Oldenburg on an exceptional quality ladies cover. It's absolutely gorgeous. There doesn't exist any other cover with that stamp in that kind of condition. The lower cover is a very common US stamp, but with a perfectly oriented cancellation on an illustrated letter. It's also unusually nice. Now, should that be considered under rarity? So can we completely separate condition and rarity, or do they need to be considered together? What do we do with condition rarities? Are they only considered under condition, or are they also considered rare because they are beautiful? And this is a very interesting philosophical discussion, I think, and I hear a lot of different opinions on these two questions. So with no further comments on my side, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I will stop. I'll share my screen for a little bit in case there are questions to specific slides, but I will give the word now to Andrew, who is going to be the Toastmaster of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henrik. Yes, we've got quite a lot of questions. The first one, I think, Dan Walker. Dan Walker has a question.
So can you please unmute him?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Early in your talk, you made the statement, explain why earliest known use is not a postal history criteria, but a traditional criteria.
I don't think I said, I hope I didn't say that,
You didn't
square.
say it, I'm right, I'm repeating it, but you implied that rare stamps and earliest known usage and condition of the stamps are not part of postal history.
I hope I didn't say that, Dan. I mean, at least I don't mean that strictly. I mean, of course, the condition is important in postal history as well. Earliest recorded dates can be very significant in postal history because it will show the first, it will show when this rate was introduced, for instance, or things like that. So I think earliest recorded uses of something can be highly significant in postal history. So if I said that earlier, if I said that that's not important in postal history, then it was a mistake.
Okay.
Right. The next question comes from Lars Butger. Lars?
Thank you. My question was how, if you want to know how many items exist, for example, 1 or 2 or 5 items of a certain route or certain markings, how long have your registration to go back to be sure about the number of covers that are available, of the number of markings? I had this discussion with another juror, and he said, yeah, if you go back 60, 70 years, then you can be quite sure. That would be my point.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think any period of time is better than no objective recording of how many you think are known or recorded. The point is that you should state that information that you are asking about on your title page. So I, for instance, state that all my rarity statements in the Danish recording relates to a group recording that has been going on for more than 30 years and has been going through all published auction catalogs containing significant Danish material since the turn of the 19th century. So in that case, it's exceptionally well researched, and very rarely are those number of recorded items for very rare items corrected. But I'm also very happy to recognize the work of the exhibitor, who him or herself has for the last 5 years, where she has been or he has been collecting this area, has been recording by searching images in auction catalogs, on the web, in books, and so on, and has figured out that based on the 5 years they have studied this, they have found 7 examples of this. If this is stated on the title page, that the rarity statements is based on what I have been able to find during the last 5 years of collecting, that's a fair statement, and I can now evaluate those rarity statements relative to that. With such a statement, I'm going to say, nice, the exhibitor has done some effort here. Yep. There are probably quite a lot more than what the exhibitor says, but it's a great effort that I would like to reward. If the exhibitor says it's based on a group registration over 30 or 50 years, then I'm going to take those rarity statements as very reliable, and I'm going to give them slightly more weight, but both are good.
Many thanks, very helpful.
Thank you. The next question comes from Claire Scott, or John Scott. Are you there?
No, it's from Claire. Hello.
Yes.
You were talking about international importance. Can you have an international importance on a country that is not regarded as internationally important, such as Brunei?
Yes. Yes, obviously. I mean, if an item from Brunei shows something that is interesting, if it had been from any other country than Brunei, to postal history collectors from any other country, if it had been from another country, then that's of international significance. So it's what I try to communicate, it's what the item shows. Is that internationally difficult to find and rare from a broad perspective, or is it not? It doesn't matter if it's Brunei or Borneo or Denmark or Great Britain. It's probably going to be easier to find internationally significant items from a big country, but it's certainly not impossible to find it from smaller countries.
Okay. The next question comes from Peter Gassman. Peter?
Yes, I'm in particular interested in censorship items. And I was wondering if censor marks can be considered also when looking at the rarity of an item.
Of course, censor marking is part of the postal treatment of an item. So of course they can be rare. Rare is whether there are few of them. And there are many censorship markings that there are very few of. So of course they can be rare. When it comes to the significance, then you should think of something similar to what we said of the other items. For instance, censor markings that were some of the world's first censor markings, they would be of international significance, because if you collect censorship of the world, you would want some examples of the very first wars where censorship would be put on covers, for instance. Or let's say censorship was done in a particular place in a very special way that was not done anywhere else in the same way. That would also be something that would be internationally significant, because it would be interesting from a worldwide sensory perspective. So it's really a question of perspective, not so much about the topic itself. So censorship markings, there are many very rare censorship markings.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, the next question comes from Eric Shearer. Eric? Are you there?
Yeah. I think we heard a lot about how to count and assess rarity. You mentioned the role of literature and that judges have a look at literature. So now there's a situation that some topics are well researched and documented in literature and other topics are not. So if I'm showing an exhibit with a topic which is not really well described in literature, how do I have to assess rarity in a context compared to a situation where rarity is very well known and documented?
I think the only thing I can say is that it is a great opportunity to do individual research, and I'm sure exhibits like that are often recognized very strongly in the criteria knowledge and research. But part of that could be to keep a database about the rarity of different aspects and very precisely define and describe what is rare about each of your items. Of course, don't have a rarity statement with every item, because then the people will not believe it anymore. But so basically state depending on how many really significant rarities you have, somewhere between 1 and 20% of your items, describe them with why they are rare and how many you have recorded over how long a period of time. So in that case, you would refer to your own recording of known items rather than to literature. But it's much harder, of course, because you would have to do the research. So it's much harder.
Okay, so the next question comes from David Katanek. David, are you there? Ah, yes, I found you. Can you unmute yourself, please? Yes,
yeah,
David.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
You're good.
I was interested in Henrik's points about rarity, because I've not previously exhibited, but the consideration about items which are recorded, I mean, from what you've already said, it's a matter of researching recorded items either through catalogues or auction material. But auctions take place around the world, don't they? But there's no central source, you might say.
Correct. There's no central source. So each exhibitor, if they don't have to do it, but if you would want to get the maximum appreciation of the rarity you have in your exhibit, you can probably do that with actually doing that research yourself. And I know it's hard. I have done it for Danish domestic mail for the last 20 years, and I have spent thousands of hours going through thousands of auction catalogs and putting it all into a database in order to make very accurate rarity statements. A lot less than that is acceptable, but yeah, each person would have to do it. It actually is a lot easier nowadays than it used to be, because it used to be that you could only get printed catalogs and you would have to go to big libraries with big collections of auction catalogs to do this. But now not all, but a lot of the modern auction catalogs exist as PDF files online. And I, for instance, have a huge collection of PDFs of auction catalogs, because any significant auction catalog available as a PDF, I download and save on my computer, so that in case I get interested in something new at some stage, I have all those catalogs as PDF files and I can go through and see what's good from that area. And I also use it for preparation when I'm going to judge. By having this huge collection of auction catalogs and also online electronic books, in addition to all the printed books, I can basically go through this material and see what's rare when I have to judge as well. So yeah, each exhibitor would have to ideally do one for themselves. They don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything, but it would probably be an advantage if you did it.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is from Hugh Moore. Hugh? Yeah.
It was simply the question about the earliest known usage. I mean, I accept that the earliest known usage of a stamp that simply is a new stamp for the same rate would not be rare, but surely the earliest known usage of a particular rate would be important from a postal history point of view.
Obviously. That's what I hope. I hope I didn't say what Dan said. What I wanted to say is what you said. This is extremely clearly explained. So a new stamp that comes out in the middle of a rate to pay the same rate, a first day usage of that stamp would not be important in postal history. But if the stamp came at the same time as the rate, then it would be significant. So
Henrik, I should have asked a question. Explain why the earliest known use of a stamp is not a postal history criteria.
Yeah, that's correct. If the stamp doesn't come at the same time as a new rate. So earliest recorded use of a stamp, let's say there is a 5 pence or 2.5 pence UPU stamp. And there is the one that comes on the 1st of July, 1875. That stamp used on the 1st of July, 1875, the first day of the UPU. That would be a significant postal history item because it shows the first day of the 2.5 pence rate. Now, the queen dies and there's a king coming and you put out a new 2.5 pence stamp. And then you change the color because the printer likes to change the color. The first earliest known use of the new king or the new color or something is not significant from a postal history perspective because the rate didn't change. Now, if you use that cover to show a very common rate, it's kind of this what I called the spice. I mean, it's nice to put in things like that if you have them. You know, if you can't find anything more interesting with a very common rate, but it should not be that kind of rarity that carries a postal history exhibit. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so the next in line is Morris Buxton, please. Morris?
It sort of follows on from this, and it's regarding positive consideration. The rules say, or possibly said, and I'll quote it, an exhibit, e.g. of rates, which spans the pre-adhesive and postage stamp eras, but amidst the first postage stamp issues, will inevitably be downgraded under importance and rarity. When those first issues are essentially a footnote in the particular postal history story being told, for example, you're showing Mauritius sea mails, for example, how much of a downgrade might that typically be?
I think that statement, if I'm not completely sure, but isn't that quote from the traditional regulations?
No, that's from the postal history regulation. It may be an older version of them.
Okay, but I mean, I would say there could be subjects, as you say, if it's maritime mail from Mauritius, then the post office stamps are not important to tell the story you are telling. And therefore, I don't think you need them. However, if you show the rates of Mauritius, and there would be a special rate during those stamps' lifetime, and you admit them, you write, I will show the rates from 1835 to 1900, except the period 1857 to 1859, or whatever. I'm just making these dates up, right? But I mean, the point with that statement is you should not, you will be not getting full points in rarity if you intentionally and unnaturally take out a rare part of your story just because you don't have the items.
But if the rates don't change over that period,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, so if the rates don't change and so on, then you don't necessarily need them, I would say, in postal history. In traditional, it's different.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The next person is Jane Sodero.
Hi there. I had a question. When you spoke earlier about somebody having done some, research about what is available in terms of postmarkings, your database, are you crediting them in the rarity category or in personal research? Or is there sort of a balance there that you make?
Well, I would say the fact that you have done them, I would give you consideration for under personal study and research. The fact that you have rare items that you can document are rare items, I would credit you for in rarity. So it's two different things. You know, you could have done that study, that database, but not have any of the rare items.
Yeah.
Then that you had still done the research, so you should still get the credit in knowledge and research. But if you also have the rare items that you can now document are rare, now you will get the credit in rarity, not for the study directly, but indirectly because you get your rarities recognized.
Okay, right, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. The next question comes from Per Christian Wallen.
Hello.
Hello.
I just have a question regarding Soviet censorship or regular. When they have international mail, the censorship was routed through specific cities. And will that mean that when you have rare local censorship, it will never become international, so it will not become as important as international?
There's a lot of noise on the line. I'm not sure I got that question. Somebody has unmuted themselves with chatter in the background. So I need to hear that question again. Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I'll try again. In Soviet censorship, after 1943, all the international censorship was routed through specific cities. That implies that rare local censorship in other places are less rare than international, if you understand. Like Moscow is mostly seen on international mail, but you will never find small local towns, which are much more rarer than the Moscow censorship.
Okay, let me try to phrase the question as I have understood this question. So basically saying there are censorship markings from small towns that are very rare.
Yes.
But they only dealt with local mail, so to say.
They're only dealt with national censorship because the international censorship went through specific towns.
Yeah, okay. So in that case, those items are local or specialized rarities, which is great for your exhibit. If that's the topic of your exhibit, they are appreciated and they need to be in your exhibit. Will you get 20 points if that's the only type of rarities you have? Probably not, because for that, you would need maybe some items sent from those small towns that then went to Jamaica and therefore went through these very internationally significant hubs, and you could show both how it was handled locally and how it was handled internationally on the same item. That would be internationally more important rare item, for instance. This is a little bit like these postmaster provisionals from the US sent locally as a postal history item. There are many different very rare versions that tells the same postal history or very similar postal history story. Whereas the Baltimore one that I showed before, which was used on a transatlantic cover, it combines several postal systems, so to say, and therefore it becomes more internationally important. So yeah, in the case where something is rare only from a very local perspective, it's very important local specialized rarity for an exhibit of that subject, but it's not considered a rarity from a broader perspective as much as other items would.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next questions comes from I think Svetislav Yelin. Sorry about my poor Russian. Are you there?
Yes. Thanks a lot. I wrote the Jim asked a similar question, so I already got the answer. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. You're okay, right?
Yeah. Thanks.
Good. Thank you. Okay. So, oh, Dan Walker would like to ask another question. Dan?
No, you've already, I revised my question to.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, Peter Gassman?
Yeah, thanks. Hi again. So you refer to common items, and some of the common items are often not found in auction catalogs because they seem to be common from for example, looking at the country perspective or the stamp that is on it. But when looking at censorship marks, they may be special because of the censorship mark. So I found often that I can only find them on sites like eBay or Del Campe and the like. Could this be that this is the only place where I can assess rarity from what I can do on my own?
Could be. I mean, if you search on a keyword that would typically be used, for instance, a town name or something in those descriptions, and you do that for 10 years on eBay and Del Campe, you will have a pretty good idea of what's rare and what's not rare in the less than $100 price class, because it's amazing how many different items are actually sold on those channels. So those channels are at least as valuable as many other channels for assessing rarity of many types of items. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
I would say one thing to that. I mean, your rarity estimates will be too rare compared to how rare those kind of items really are. The problem is that to get a good rarity estimation, it's much easier to do for expensive material because they come out as single items on auction. So things that are too cheap to be sold as single items on auction, they are extremely lovely in exhibits and can be at least as interesting and can be highly appreciated in exhibits, but it is very, very hard to come up with an accurate rarity statement because many of those items, if they are not put on eBay and Del Campe, they are sold privately, they are sold in lots, they are sold in dealers' boxes and so on, and it's impossible to survey a decent percentage of that market. So it is a great effort to do those kind of rarity estimates. They will be highly appreciated, but as a judge, I will take them with a grain of salt because you will simply, it will have been impossible to survey the actual pool of items that should exist of something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Andrea. Andrea.
Oh, hi. Yeah, it was not a real question. In fact, it was more of a comment about what you said about new stamps serving old rates. I was bringing the examples of the penny red, which is possibly the most famous example in international philately.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are many penny red covers that are great postal history items, of course, but an early use of a penny red would be a great item in a traditional penny red exhibit and also considered a rarity in that. But in postal history, from a postal history perspective, it would not be considered as much a postal history rarity as it would in traditional in an exhibit of penny reds. I mean, that's sure. All I was trying to say.
No, I understand. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from John Scott.
Can I begin by saying, thanking you both for the most professional and best curated Zoom presentation I've had yet. My question is, some collectors employ professionals to prepare their exhibits. The research is therefore not personal to the exhibitor. Does that matter?
No. And this is clearly stated in the rules. We judge the exhibit, not the exhibitor. And that means that as a judge, we judge what's in the frames, and it's completely illegal to judge who exhibits it, how that person earned their money, how that person got it mounted, whatever. We are judging the exhibit, not the exhibitor. So that has no relevance whatsoever.
So can I come back and say that when my wife Claire, who asked the previous question, was downgraded because the judge felt that Claire uses a pseudonym for her Malay name for exhibiting, Kumala Indra, and the judge said that they couldn't give the medal to that particular exhibit because Claire Scott had a better collection. Would that be an acceptable way of judging nowadays, or is that something in the past?
I shall not comment on specific previous judging events of which I was not part and therefore cannot really comment on. So I'm sorry, I'll have to refrain from asking that question. But it's funny.
Right. Any more questions? Right. It doesn't seem. And no more questions. Okay. Well, I would like to. One more question. All right. Okay. Yes. That's Per Christian Wallen.
Yeah, I'll try once more. When you have rarity, does it matter where this information is? Is it from some archive or is it some empirical research if you've been searching through eBay and Del Campo for the last 20 years? Or if you have some specific open sources?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is your question whether the rarity statements are more relevant or believable, whether you have done them or whether they are publicly available? Is that what you're saying?
I'm trying to say, if you see in some archives, this cancel was used in January 1943. Or if you have the same information from some thousand different eBay and Del Campo auctions, that you see the first date is this date and the last date is this date.
Okay, I mean, I'm a scientist, so if you have it black on white from an archive, that date is very, very likely to be the right date. So I will, of course, appreciate that you have been in the archive and found that specific information. I'm going to consider that more accurate than a survey of covers, because you may have missed the first and last days because no covers have survived from those days. That does not mean that I would not appreciate very much, if it's not available in the archive, that you have gone through the trouble on figuring out those use dates yourself. And I think if that's what you have done for all your material and your exhibit, I think you should state that very clearly on your introductory page, on which research your first and last dates are related to. But I think we are moving slightly into knowledge and research now rather than rarity. So I'm sure Andrew will like to comment on things like that when he gives his presentation.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll repeat that question on a later session.
Okay. Right. Let me see. We have...
Andrew, you seem not to have received my question. That's Graham Winters.
No, I'm just trying to look for it. There seems to be a lot. Yes, go ahead, please.
You mentioned at the beginning the use of frankings as spice. You like to see them, they're nice. Can you translate that into marks at all?
Translating individual items into marks is of course impossible, because what you judge is the overall impression of an exhibit. And you cannot kind of come up with some kind of hypothetical situation. The person has this item or doesn't have this item, what's the point going to be? That's impossible to do on a Skype session or a Zoom session, of course. But what I'm trying to say with that is that there was a tendency in the past that in postal history, sometimes judges tended to look for things that are rare from a traditional perspective. And they are not necessarily needed in a postal history exhibit. I can give you an example. I once saw a postal history exhibit of classic Canada. It was called the Postal History of Pence and Cents or something like that. It had on the first frame and a half, the first beaver stamp with the different printings, different varieties, things like that. And basically, and it said domestic rate in Canada, 3 cents. And that was and then the headline was print that, position that, stone that, variety that, 1.5 page. That exhibit got a gold medal in that exhibition more than 20 years ago, and I was shocked because there was no postal history development in that exhibit. There was only traditional rarity, or almost only traditional rarity in that exhibit, and what carried the rarity was the traditional aspects, not the postal history. So what I want to say is that what should carry the rarity in a postal history exhibit should be the postal history rarities. Now, if you are now on the border between 2 scores, let's say 17 and 18, for instance, and then I also have noticed that not only do you have postal history rarities, but when your common items regularly, I see something that's exciting for another reason, for traditional reason, in the more common stuff. And then I said, should I give that point or that point? Then I'll probably tend to go up. And I mean, if we talk 19, 20 points, then I expect you to have looked for the rarest possible version of almost anything you show. And then I would actually want to see things like that added in there in the ideal situation.
Yeah, I understand that. It sounds like the Canadian judges should have transferred that Canadian exhibit to traditional.
Yeah, except that it didn't have any stamps. So then it would have had a problem of having no unused stamps, no essays and proofs, and so on. So that exhibit would have been very difficult to place in a category where it would have scored very high.
So it was stamps on cover, in other words.
Indeed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So it's an open question. Anybody wanting to answer Henrik's questions on the quality demands of collectors have gone up with time? Should this be reflected in stricter judging of condition? And the other one, which is, are they also considered under rarity or only under condition? Anybody? That's the slide being shared.
For me, for the second part, the condition versus now I've lost the slide. Yes. I would add that, and I would consider that under the spice, as you've been calling it, for the pretty cover or the advertising cover. I would consider that to be that little bit of extra when choosing between a common item and a common item with some excitement.
But would you consider it under rarity or condition, or both?
I would probably look at it as rarity, because I'm not looking necessarily at the quality of the cover in terms of that would be my first impression, was not the quality of the cover in terms of tears and rips and and the placement of the stamp and things like that.
Yeah, but I mean, then you are taking the superb condition and pushing it slightly as a spice and rarity, which I tend to feel could be right, you know, because I can tell you that that kind of Oldenburg cover there, the one with the illustrations on, would be 100 times as expensive as a standard one.
Yeah.
Because many people would want that particular cover and not the second, third, or fourth best.
Well, if I might interrupt, that's exactly what's happened. The expectations of collectors have made finest quality more rare, because the almost finest quality material has become less desirable. So it is a rarity, but it's not exactly a postal history rarity, it's a quality rarity.
Indeed.
Okay, Hugh or Moore wants to ask another question.
No, I didn't want to ask another question. I wanted just to comment on the first of Henrik's two questions, whether these things are becoming stricter is right. I mean, I think it is, because certainly in the 20 years I've been exhibiting, judges have begun to look at condition much more critically than used to be the case. Obviously, Chris King will deal with that in presentation in a way that presentation affects us as well. But it was possible to get away with a pretty ragged cover 20 years ago. It shouldn't have been. It isn't now, and that's right.
I have a slightly contradicting opinion on that, because I have a feeling that we have a certain tendency that exhibits become a little bit too much sterile, and especially the context of presentation, and especially the storytelling part is still missing, especially in many postal history. People think they are good, but they are not so good as they think. And often I've seen that cover which maybe is not of the best quality is exactly the cover that you need in the context of a storyline to say this existed, this specific context of combinations of postal history aspects. So I think there's kind of a fight, and in the end it's about the leverage of those different aspects.
Can I say I agree with that? Because essentially what I'm saying is, if there's a better quality item, then you can use it. But if you've got a ragged cover that tells the story, it's the first prize to use.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I tried to express in this quality rarity matrix. And if you have something very ragged, very ugly, you really need to ask the question, is this really needed for my exhibit? Not for rarity, but for treatment. So, but this is not a seminar on treatment, so therefore I would not go into more detail, but I agree that a ragged cover that shows an aspect that you can only show with that cover, there could be good reasons to include that cover. In the end, it's a balance between whether you think including that very ugly cover will give you more bonus in treatment and knowledge and research than it could lose you in condition. Not in condition of that specific item, but in the general impression of the condition of the whole exhibit. And I don't think a single ragged cover is going to change the conception of the whole exhibit, the impression of the whole exhibit. But if you had 10, 15, 20 of them, it may be the case.
Yeah, don't you think, though, there are some aspects of postal history where you're almost certainly going to get large amounts of, shall we say, not particularly pretty covers? I mean, a lot of military mail, a lot of postage due and redirected mail, they're all likely to be in much poorer condition than some traditional postal history exhibits.
And Indian
and you would expect it.
Covers are one of those problems. Same problem. Yeah.
But that's why I said, I think on the first or second slide, that in the condition section, that the condition needs to be judged relative to what exists.
Yeah.
So if all the covers you are showing are the best available condition, and there are also rare items and they are also the best available condition, then you should get high points, even though the cover in your military mail area are generally not as pretty as GB lining grade.
Isn't there a risk here with postal history, if condition becomes king, that we will see covers being improved to make them look better than they were, and that their history shows that they were? Isn't this a big risk that we're going to run if condition does become king?
It has happened for 100 years.
But we don't want it particularly to continue, do we? Or do we?
No, I personally don't, but I mean, it happens, and it has happened for 100 years. I think it's a very interesting discussion. What is the condition of a repaired cover?
Yes, well, it may not be what it purports to be. It may be something slightly different.
Yeah, I personally don't consider the condition of a repaired cover very high.
And I would agree with that as well.
Because if it's repaired, it probably looked ratty before. And so that was a cover in ratty condition.
But what about a cover, Henrik? What about a cover that's been stabilized because it was going to be fox to hell, or to be with one of these oak gall inks, which is eating through the paper, and it's been stabilized? Is that being repaired, improved, or stabilized?
This is an impossible discussion to have, I think, a very square and very definitive opinion on. I mean, I do personally think, like I think, as far as I know you think, that it is better to what you call stabilize or repair an item if that will save that item from destruction. Then I would certainly rather have it exist as a restored or saved or whatever you want to call it than it going to pieces. So yeah, I would prefer that cover to be repaired in that case. But I would want the description to say this cover was repaired. And if that cover is the only cover showing the aspect you are showing, then that's the best condition existing for that aspect you want to show. But if there are 3 other covers that didn't need to be rescued and which looks fine, then I would consider the condition of any of the non-repaired covers as higher as your repaired one.
There's a problem with a lot of the First World War covers in that the paper, because of the poor condition of the paper at the time the paper was made, the paper itself of the envelope is actually just dying on its own. And a lot of those you can't justify restoring or repairing because it may well be the only cachet known of that particular ambulance or whatever unit. But the paper of the envelope is very poor, so you can never get a good copy because the envelope's never going to be in good condition. So do you show it or do you not show it?
Depends on how important it is to my story.
So if your story is about the cachets, you've got a perfect cachet, but the envelope that the perfect cachet is on is actually really quite tatty. What do you do? It's the only one recorded.
Then I show it.
But is it important or not important? I mean, do you follow that you have the only cachet that you're trying to illustrate in your story, you have a really tatty envelope. So your condition is poor, but you can't have it in any other form than poor. So it's like you get...
In an ideal world, you should not be penalized for that because it's the best possible condition for that item. We don't live in an ideal world. So if 20 or 30 covers in your exhibit look like that, it will subconsciously, fairly or unfairly, affect the general impression of the exhibit. And I think the judges will tend to maybe give it slightly fewer points that it may have deserved. But unfortunately, in many respects, we don't live in an ideal world, and here also not.
Climatic conditions.
But I mean, if you include 2 or 3 of them because they are unique and you need them for the story, but the rest is kind of reasonably good, then I don't think it affects the condition score at all. It's when exhibitors include many like that, then it tends to affect it.
Because you have the same issue, don't you, with the climatic conditions of the Far East, where a lot of the paper can get foxing and the gum under the stamp can make the stamp go in really quite interesting colour that has no correlation whatsoever to what it ought to be, but actually can still be an incredibly rare item because of either its date or its route or whatever. And yet, if you look at it objectively, you're saying, well, this is a fox tatty cover because of all the foxing, but that's the condition because of where it was.
Yeah. It's therefore ask the question, is it really needed for my story? If the question is yes, show the cover. You know, judging is of course not, it is not the individual criteria seen in isolation when you are an exhibitor, because sometimes you have items that will help you in one category and may not help you in another category. So it's kind of, it's a whole, right? I mean, if you get much better points in treatment because you are more complete and you show all aspects of the story by adding these very tatty cover, the 1 point you may lose in condition is not going to hurt you as much as the 3 points you may lose in treatment if you didn't show them. So it's in an ideal world, if there's only one and it's ratty, then nobody should be penalized for that because it's the best condition that item exists in. I would say. I think it's a very interesting discussion. I don't think that there will ever be a clear answer to these kind of things.
Okay. Right. Any more questions? Any more questions?
Not from me.
Not right. Okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to run off my evening or your afternoon by saying a big thank you to our speaker, Henrik, for giving us a wonderful, wonderful seminar on the rarities, and it is indeed great to hear that nowadays the rarities in your collection, rarities, the judges are now judge your rarities. They're graded, you know, from the very rare world rarities to international rarities to national rarities, and now you don't have people just coming to ask you, you know, why I've got a branch office cover with only 3 no, why do I not get maximum points for rarity? So and that's a really good seminar. And I also like to thank FIP for hosting the seminar especially Kelly and Dr. Prof, who's the Vice President of FIP, for allowing us to use the FIP channel. And they also allowed us to use the recording and put it on the our FIP Postal History website. And of course, I thank you for all the participants. You know, I've been answering emails, giving off the links for the last week or so. You know, every day, you know, I had about 20 to 30 or 40 emails to answers, and particularly on the last couple of hours, I still got about 10 to give the links to people, and I'm so glad that some of them actually turned up. And then last but not least, I really have to thank two people, Chris King and Mike Hoffman of the Royal, you know, for giving me some encouragement or how to run a webliner properly. You know, this is my first time. I never used to do this kind of thing. But, you know, thanks. I mean, Mike really helped. And Chris, of course, you know, he's always my teacher. Chris, say hello. Right. Let me.
Hello. Actually, I was just writing to you and to Brakov, saying this is a fantastic model for how the Bureau can reach a wider audience. And by Bureau, that's Bureau with an X. And I mean all the Bureau. And the Bureau meetings can use Zoom. I think we've suddenly discovered, because of COVID-19, that there are ways of building support for all of the Bureau and for the FIP around the world. So congratulations for being the trailblazer. And of course, we are always glad to help. So thank you. And Henrik,
yes, thank you very much.
I agree with nearly everything you said.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Well, anyway, the next seminar will be actually presented by Chris on the 6th of September on the importance of presentation in postal history exhibiting. Right? Yeah, good. Yes, thumbs up. Yes. I think Chris is going to give a wonderful presentation on presentation, and well, stay tuned. Anyway, I think this comes to the end of the recording part of the seminar, and